The house was dead quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, either. It was the heavy, pressing sort that wraps around your chest and makes you feel like you're holding your breath underwater. I sat at the kitchen counter, just kind of zoning out, one finger slowly circling the rim of my coffee mug. The coffee had gone stone cold hours ago, but I wasn't really planning on drinking it. I was waiting. The wall clock kept ticking. Each second felt longer than the one before. 5:37 a.m. She was supposed to be home last night. She told me it was just a girls' night. A harmless evening out with some of her friends. That's what she said. Now, I'm not the type of guy who blindly hands out trust. To me, trust isn't something you throw around like confetti. It's something you build, slow and steady, like a brick wall, one action at a time. I had done my part. I had been honest, loyal, consistent. And until now, I thought she had too. Then I heard it. A car door slammed shut outside. A second later, the sharp sound of heels tapping across the driveway sliced through the silence. The front door eased open like she was coming home from the grocery store, like it was any other day. No apology. No explanation. No shame. I looked up. There she was, my wife, Olivia. Always stunning, always put together. Her honey blonde hair was a little messy, but in that effortless way that looked intentional. The tight dress she wore clung to her body like it was made just for her. Makeup smudged just enough to seem natural, not careless. She looked like she had come from somewhere important. Somewhere fancy. Somewhere she shouldn't have been. She looked me dead in the eye, and then she smirked. That smirk was the first thing that rattled me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. No guilt. No regret. Just smug amusement. "Morning, babe," she said sweetly, tossing her expensive purse on the counter like this was just some normal Tuesday morning. I didn't say anything at first. Just watched her. Closely. The way she combed her fingers through her hair. The way she made a point to avoid the clock on the wall. The way she kicked off her heels with a sigh, like she was worn out from an honest night out with friends. And then I noticed it. Or more accurately, what wasn't there? Her dress. It was short. Way too short for a cold winter night. The hem hit just above mid-thigh, and it left little to the imagination. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what she wasn't wearing under it. She didn't have on any underwear. Something in me shifted. A tight knot started forming in my chest. Slow. Controlled. Dangerous. I set the mug down. "Olivia," I said, my voice unervingly calm. She finally turned her head to meet my stare. "Yeah." My eyes didn't move off her. "Where's your underwear?" For the first time, her expression changed. Barely. A flicker of something passed through her face. Surprise. No, not quite. It was more calculated than that. Then came the smile. Not an embarrassed one. Not even a guilty one. No, this one was sharp. Knowing. "Oh, that," she said, almost laughing. "Guess I left them. Somewhere." Her words slapped me harder than any physical blow ever could. So casual. So brazen. Like she was commenting on the weather. I didn't move. Didn't blink. My heart was steady, but my mind was sprinting in circles. "You left them somewhere," I repeated, my tone like ice. She gave a short, amused breath through her nose, like the conversation was silly to her. "Come on, Jake, are we really gonna do this?" I leaned forward just a little. "Do what, exactly?" She chuckled and shook her head, like I just asked why water was wet. Then she stepped closer, resting her manicured hands on the counter directly across from me. "I cheated on you," she said. Just like that. No hesitation. No flinching. Just those 4 words, delivered as casually as if she were telling me she picked up takeout instead of cooking. I didn't say a word. I just stared. She wanted a reaction. That's what this was. She wanted yelling. Fury. A meltdown. She wanted drama. Something she could grab onto and twist to make herself feel better. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. A slow, unsettling smile that made her own confidence falter for the briefest second. I saw it. That tiny twitch in her cheek. She was thrown off. She didn't expect calm. I picked up the cold mug again, took a small sip, and said, "Just like that." She shrugged like it was nothing. "Every woman does it, Jake. It's natural. Guys do it all the time, but when a woman steps out, suddenly it's this whole thing." She clicked her tongue and shook her head. Such outdated double standards. I set the cup down, still steady. "You really believe that?" She gave me a look like I was the one being ridiculous. "Of course. Most wives cheat. They just don't tell their husbands." I leaned back in my chair, arms folding across my chest. "And you thought telling me was what? Some kind of power move?" Another smirk. "Maybe." The silence stretched between us like a rubber band ready to snap. It felt like a storm about to roll in. And then I let out a quiet laugh. Not out of amusement. It was colder than that. "Good to know," I said softly, standing up. She raised a brow. "That's it." I picked up my phone and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "I've got work to get to." That threw her off. "You're not going to scream? Demand answers? Tell me to pack my bags?" I paused at the doorway and glanced over my shoulder. "Why would I? You already gave me all the answers I need." And with that, I walked out. But inside, my mind was anything but calm. If Olivia thought she was going to win this little game of hers, she had no idea who she was playing with. The city was still asleep when I stepped outside. The cold morning air wrapped around me, crisp and biting, and I could smell the faint aroma of wet pavement mixed with fresh brewed coffee drifting from the cafe a few blocks away. The sun hadn't even broken over the skyline yet, and everything felt gray, like the pause before something breaks. I slid into my car and started the engine, but I didn't pull away right away. I just sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the wheel, staring at nothing. Her voice still echoed in my head. "I cheated on you. Like it was no big deal. Like it was just another line in a casual conversation. No guilt. No tears. Just the cold, detached honesty of someone who thought they'd already won the game. But she hadn't won. Not even close." Eventually, I pulled into the parking garage under my office building. The echo of the engine hummed against concrete as I shut it off and headed for the elevator. I loosened my tie a little, gave myself a second to collect my thoughts, then rode the elevator all the way to the top floor, my floor. Everything up there was sleek and in order. Glass walls, clean lines, espresso machines humming in the background. The office had the look and feel of a man who had his life under control. And I did. Or at least I used to. But Olivia had smashed right through that calm like a stone through glass. My assistant, Claire, greeted me with her usual chipper energy as I walked past her desk. "Good morning, Mr. Harper. Your 8 a.m. meeting is locked in, and the Q4 revisions are on your desk." "Thanks," I said, already halfway past. Then I paused. "Actually, I need something else." She straightened, ready to type before I even gave the instruction. "Find this guy for me," I said, turning my phone around so she could see the contact on the screen. She glanced at the name, Noah Callahan, private investigator. Claire didn't ask questions. She never did. She just nodded. "I'll have him here by noon." "Perfect," I said, heading into my office. Once I was alone, I closed the door, let out a long, slow breath, and rolled my shoulders back. Step one was already in motion. By noon, Noah was sitting across from me in one of the leather chairs, looking like a man who'd been around the block more times than he could count. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Steel gray hair. Calm eyes that had probably seen more affairs, secrets, and lies than most people could imagine. "So," he said, voice steady, resting his hands on the chair arms. "What are we digging into?" I leaned back, folding my hands over my stomach. "Cheating," I said plainly. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Not surprised, just curious. "You looking for proof? Divorce case?" I smiled faintly. "No. I already know. I've got proof. What I want is everything else." He tilted his head. "Everything else?" "Yeah. I want to know who she's been with, when it started, where they go, how often. I want transaction logs, call records, security footage." I want to know if she's got secrets even she's forgotten about. Noah let out a low whistle. That's a tall order. I met his gaze without blinking. Not for you. That made him grin. He liked that. You did your homework. I don't hire amateurs, I replied. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers together. All right, Mr. Harper. How deep do you want me to go? To the foundation. He gave a slow nod, pulling a notebook from his jacket pocket. Give me a few days. I'll start with the basics, her phone activity, credit cards, any hotel stays. Then we'll widen the scope. Good, I said, standing up. And Callahan? He looked up. This stays between us. Of course, he said with a smirk. I watched him leave, then turned toward the massive windows behind my desk. The city stretched out before me, glimmering in the pale daylight. It looked like control, like power, and it was all mine. Olivia thought her little stunt was checkmate. She had no idea the game had just begun. That night, a little before 9:30, I got a message from Noah. Got something already. Security footage from last night. Sending it now. I opened the video file and let it load. Grainy black and white footage from a hotel hallway. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. Then there she was, Olivia, stepping out of a room. Her hair was messy in that just had sex kind of way. Her dress looked like it had just been thrown back on. She glanced back over her shoulder, gave someone inside the room a smile, and walked off down the hall with that same smug confidence I'd seen earlier. I closed the video. My jaw clenched. She had paid for the hotel herself. She'd walked out of there like it was the best night of her life. No shame, no fear, no remorse. But now I had more than just suspicion. I had the beginning of leverage. I looked over at the time glowing from my desk, 9:15 p.m. Most of the city was winding down. But me, I was just getting started. I turned back to my laptop, pulled up her financial records, and started going through them line by line. Credit card statements, online banking, purchase history, all the fancy dinners, designer clothes, spa days, wine tastings. She'd lived large on my dime for years. But now I was tearing it all apart, stripping her lifestyle down to bare bones. Then I saw it. A hotel charge from the night before. Booked under a fake name. Paid in full. By her. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. So she wasn't just cheating, she was bankrolling the whole thing herself. That was useful. That meant control. I picked up my phone and made a call. It rang once. "Mr. Harper," came the voice on the other end, crisp and efficient. "How can I assist?" "Lock all secondary accounts," I said. "Freeze her cards. Redirect any auto payments to my primary account." "Do you want that temporary or permanent?" I smiled. "Permanent." There was a brief pause. "Understood. Changes will be active within the hour." I ended the call and leaned back again, feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole thing started. Satisfaction. Come morning, Olivia's world was going to start cracking. And that was only step 2. The next morning, everything on the surface looked normal. Birds chirping outside. Sunlight spilling in through the blinds. That warm, golden morning calm that makes you forget how brutal the world can be. I moved through my routine like it was just another Tuesday. Meetings. Emails. Contract reviews. I smiled at the right people, nodded in the right rooms. But inside, I was waiting. Waiting for the first crack. And it didn't take long. At 2:43 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Jake, something's wrong with my card. It's declining. Can you check with the bank?" I let the message sit there. Unread. Ignored. She could wait. 30 minutes later, I replied. "That's strange. I'll look into it later." Her response came fast. Real fast. "Can you check now? I'm at Chanel." Of course she was. I didn't bother replying. Just hit mute and went back to work. That was step 3, confusion. Just the start of her world unraveling. When I got home that night, she was already waiting for me. standing near the front door, arms crossed, eyes flickering with irritation. "You ignored my texts," she said, voice clipped. I set my briefcase down, took off my coat slow and calm. "I was busy." She sighed hard, clearly trying to keep her cool. "My account's still not working. I tried to make a purchase and it got declined again. Something's up." I tilted my head, acting like I was just now hearing about it. "Really? That's odd." "Yes," she snapped. "Really? Can you fix it?" I looked at her for a second, just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Maybe you've just been spending too much," I said, casual as hell. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I mean, it's possible. You've been living pretty large, Olivia. Might be time to tighten up a bit." Her face changed. Not panic, yet, but there was a flicker of something. Uncertainty. That's when I knew I was getting through to her. She scoffed. "That's rich, coming from you. You make more than enough money. And now you're gonna stand there and lecture me on spending." I gave her a slow smile. Things change. That hit her harder than anything else I'd said so far. For the first time since this all started, she didn't have a comeback. She was quiet, watching me like she couldn't figure out who she was dealing with anymore. The next morning, the house looked the same. Polished hardwood, granite countertops, expensive furniture she insisted on. Everything looked picture perfect. But the tension, it was in the air now. She was at the dining table, scrolling through her phone like her life depended on it. I watched her from behind my coffee cup. Her fingers moved a little too fast. Her forehead was slightly pinched. She was pissed, but more than that, she was nervous. "Something wrong?" I asked. She didn't look up. "No. Just dealing with something." I set my mug down and tilted my head. "You seem tense." She flashed a quick smile, fake as hell. "I'm fine." Liar. I'd known her too long not to see the signs. She was slipping. And that's exactly what I needed. Then came the second punch. At 11:20 a.m., my phone buzzed again. "Jake, my accounts are still frozen. I can't even get into my savings. The bank won't tell me anything. Did you do something?" This time I didn't wait an hour. I waited 2. Let her stew in it. Then I replied, "That's weird. Maybe talk to your financial advisor?" I knew damn well she didn't have one. I'd always handled everything. Seconds later, the typing bubbles appeared again. "Jake, you need to fix this." She still didn't get it. So I turned off my phone and went to lunch. That evening when I pulled into the driveway, I could tell she'd shifted strategies. She wasn't angry anymore. She was putting on a show. She was dressed to kill, silk champagne-colored dress, gold jewelry, makeup flawless. Hair curled just right. She looked like someone trying hard to prove everything was fine. "I'm heading to dinner with the girls," she said, smoothing her dress like it was an afterthought. I watched her for a long moment. "Have fun." She smiled, but it wobbled. Just a little. Then she turned and walked out, heels clicking like nothing was wrong. But I knew where she was going. Noah had already sent me the reservation details. Downtown. Some high-end place they all loved. She'd booked the table that morning, probably thinking she could fake normal if she stayed on script. I drove across town and parked where I had a clear view of the restaurant entrance. And then I waited. She arrived right on time. Walked in like a queen. Sat down with her friends, all smiles and laughter, sipping wine like she didn't have a care in the world. But I kept watching. And eventually, it happened. About an hour in, she reached for her purse, opened her wallet, and froze. I saw it in her shoulders, the tension, the slight panic. No cards. No cash. No access. She masked it quick, of course. Tucked her wallet away and went for her phone instead. A minute later, my phone buzzed. "Jake, I need you to send me money. Right now." I stared at the screen. Let the message sit. Didn't respond. Just watched. Because for the first time, she needed me. And for the first time, I wasn't going to save her. Olivia had always known how to light up a room. That was one of her favorite tricks. She'd strut in, flash that polished smile, and suddenly every woman wanted to be her and every guy wanted to be with her. It worked on everyone. But not this time. Not tonight. I sat in my car across the street, watching through the tinted windows. The glow from the restaurant bathed the sidewalk in soft gold. Inside, Olivia was still at her table, still putting on the performance, laughing, gesturing with her wine glass like nothing in the world had changed. But I knew better. Something in her had cracked. She kept glancing at her phone, gripping it a little too tightly, her fingers tapping the screen like she was waiting for someone to throw her a lifeline. She tucked the phone away and reached for her glass again, but the tension didn't leave her shoulders. Not even close. And then the check arrived. I could see her stiffen, just barely. Her hand went to her purse again, slower this time. More cautious. She pulled out her wallet, flipped it open, and froze. From where I sat, I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was looking at. Nothing. No cards. No cash. Just the echo of the life she used to control. She sat there for a second, then let out a soft little laugh, tilted her head and said something to her friends. I imagined the exact words coming out of her mouth. "Oh, that's weird. My card's not working. Probably some bank glitch. You know how it is." They nodded. They always did. Sophie, the kind one, probably said something like, "Don't worry, I've got it." And Olivia, she smiled. Grateful. Humble. But inside, that had to sting. She'd never been the kind of woman who needed someone to pick up her tab. Once they finished dinner and walked outside, I watched her hug each of her friends goodbye, still wearing the same high society mask. She waved like everything was perfect. Then their cars drove off one by one. And she was alone. Her face changed the second they were gone. No more smiles. No more charm. Just a woman standing under a streetlight with a hollow expression. Then came the next message. "Jake, I'm serious. I need you to send me money. I don't know what's going on, but I can't access anything." I leaned back in my seat, letting the glow from her phone reflect off her face while she stared at the screen. I let her sit in it. Then I replied, "I thought you said money was never a problem." There was a full 60-second pause. Then the message came through. "What does that mean?" "It means you always acted like none of it mattered. So now it doesn't." I watched as her thumbs froze over the screen. She just stood there, looking around, like she'd suddenly realized she was on her own. Not just financially. Completely. She turned and headed to her car, fumbling with her keys. I started my engine and followed, just a few blocks behind. Not close enough to be seen. Just close enough to make sure she got home. When I walked through the front door a little while later, she was already inside, pacing the living room, phone still in hand. The moment she saw me, she spun around. "What the hell is going on?" I calmly set my keys on the entry table, took off my jacket, and walked toward the kitchen like she hadn't just shouted in my face. "You'll have to be more specific," I said. "Don't give me that," she snapped, following behind. "My cards don't work. My bank accounts are locked. The bank won't tell me anything. And now you're walking around like this is some big joke." I poured myself a drink, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. "I never said it was a joke," I said finally. She stormed closer, heels clacking against the hardwood. "Then explain it." I turned and looked her in the eye. "You live in my house, drive my car, spend my money, and yet, somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself none of it was mine." Her expression shifted, confused, defensive, unsure. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time you learn what life looks like without me footing the bill." She blinked. Hard. "You wouldn't do that," she said, her voice dropping to something almost desperate. "You wouldn't do that to me." I tilted my head slightly, raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't I?" For the first time, her confidence cracked. This wasn't an inconvenience anymore. This was real. And she knew it. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. "Got something. You'll want to see this." I locked my phone and looked back at her. She was gripping the back of a chair now, knuckles white, body rigid. She had no idea what was coming next, and I had no intention of warning her. The house was quiet again, but not like before. This time, it wasn't the suffocating kind. It was the calm before the storm. She was still curled up on the edge of the couch when I walked into the room. One leg tucked under her, phone in her lap, not even touching it. She wasn't scrolling, wasn't texting, just sitting, staring. She looked small, shrinking in a house that had always felt like her stage. And for the first time in years, I saw something in her that didn't belong: uncertainty. She'd spent the last 24 hours pretending, smiling at the right times, acting like nothing had changed. But I saw through it. The way her fingers twitched every time her phone buzzed. The distance in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. She was unraveling. I loosened my tie as I stepped into the room. Casual. Calm. When she noticed me, she sat up straighter, smoothed her dress like that could put the pieces back together. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she asked, carefully controlling her tone. I didn't answer right away. Just walked over to the bar and poured myself another drink. The ice clinked in the glass as I swirled it. "I thought you already knew," I said finally, not looking at her. She let out a breath through her nose, trying to keep cool. "Jake, if this is some kind of punishment." I cut her off without turning around. "It's not a punishment. It's a wake-up call." She got up then, heels softly tapping across the floor. Her voice changed. A little sharper. A little more desperate. "By cutting me off? Locking my accounts like I'm some stranger?" I turned slowly to face her, leaning against the counter. "Aren't you?" She blinked. Once. Twice. "You're trying to punish me." I took a sip from the glass, watching her over the rim. "That's one way to look at it." She flared her nostrils, her voice rising with frustration. "You're not going to keep this up. You love control too much. And the second you push me too far, I'll push back." I laughed under my breath. "Set the glass down. Push back." She stepped closer, voice softening again, trying to take the edge off. "You think I don't have options, Jake?" Now that made me smile. I walked over, sat down across from her, relaxed in the chair like I had all the time in the world. "Go on," I said. "Enlighten me." She lifted her chin, trying to recover some of that old fire. "I've built a life outside of you. I have friends. Influence. I'm not just your wife, I'm someone people respect." She spread her hands, warming up to the monologue. "You really think I need your money?" I just watched her. No reaction. No emotion. Then I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. One tap. One message. Send it. 5 seconds later, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She frowned, picked it up, glanced at the screen. And everything changed. Her smirk faded. Her lips parted, just barely. Confusion. Then dread. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Something wrong. She didn't answer. She just stared at her screen like it had betrayed her. Fingers hovering over the glass, like touching it would make the truth vanish. Finally, slowly, she looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Her voice was different now. No bite. No charm. Just fear. I didn't even glance at the screen. I didn't need to. I already knew what she was looking at. Surveillance footage. Grainy. Black and white. A timestamp from 2 nights ago. A hotel hallway. Her stepping out of her room, dress wrinkled, hair tousled, adjusting the strap of her purse with a little satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. And then him. Some guy, not me, standing in the doorway behind her. Not touching. Not kissing. Just watching her leave. And that was enough. She'd paid for the room herself. Used a fake name. She had walked in on her own and walked out looking proud of it. The silence between us was thick, pressing down on the room like fog. She gripped her phone tighter, knuckles white, trying to hold herself together. "Jake," she started, voice cracking. I tilted my head. "You were saying—" She blinked. Again. And again. Like maybe this was all just a bad dream she could snap out of. This isn't what it looks like," she said softly, voice shaking. I didn't even bother responding. She opened her mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. For the first time since she'd smirked her way through that confession, she had nothing. No clever lines. No rehearsed lies. Just silence. I leaned back, exhaling slow. You thought you were untouchable, Olivia, I said. You thought I'd always be here, no matter what. That I'd clean up the mess. She looked away, blinking fast, lips trembling. You still thought you were in control. I stood, walking toward her. But the thing about control? I stopped just a foot away from her. It was never yours to begin with. The room was so still I could hear the second hand on the wall clock. She swallowed hard, closed her eyes, opened them again. And then, there it was. Not anger, not frustration, but fear. Genuine, bone-deep fear. She finally realized this wasn't just a fight. This wasn't about money, or ego, or pride. This was the beginning of the fall. And she had no idea how far down it would go. The silence between us sat heavy in the room. Olivia was gripping her phone so hard her knuckles had gone white, her eyes still locked on that damning footage. Her mouth was slightly open like she wanted to say something, but didn't know what. It was over. Not just the lie. Not just the illusion of control. But the version of herself she had tried to sell me for years. She swallowed hard and looked up at me, voice barely above a whisper. This isn't what it looks like. I tilted my head, almost amused. That's what you're going with? She hesitated. Her eyes darted from my face back to the phone like she was looking for a reset button. A way to go back before the truth showed up on screen. You don't know the full story, she said. I didn't blink. Then tell me. She stood there frozen, trying to collect herself. Her lips pressed together, jaw clenching and relaxing again like she was trying to shape the right version of the truth. Finally, she exhaled. It was a mistake. I raised my eyebrows, just a little. A mistake. Yes, she said quickly. I drank too much. I wasn't thinking clearly. It wasn't supposed to happen. I let that hang there in the air for a moment, just long enough to let her feel hope. Then I asked, how many times did you make that same mistake? That stopped her. She wasn't expecting that. She stared at me, panicked, trying to decide whether to double down or retreat. It was only once, she said, rushing the words. I swear. Just once. It didn't mean anything. I gave her a small nod, as if I believed her. Then, without saying a word, I pulled out my phone again. Tapped a few times. Turned the screen toward her. Another video. Different hotel. Different date. Same woman. Same betrayal. Her face went pale. All the color drained in seconds. She looked at the date. At me. Back at the screen. Her breath hitched. She didn't even try to lie this time. She just froze. She knew. One time was something she could argue. Two. That was a pattern. A decision. Her voice barely came out. How long have you known? I took my time answering. Long enough. She swallowed again. Then why this? Why not just leave? I leaned back against the counter, arms folded. Because leaving wasn't enough. She blinked, confused. Because you laughed at me. Mocked what we had. You looked me in the eye and smirked while you threw everything we built into the fire. She stepped forward slightly, softer now. Jake, I messed up. I know that. But we've been together so long. That has to count for something. I said nothing. She reached for my hand, her fingers brushing against mine. I can fix this, she whispered. I want to fix this. I didn't pull away immediately. Just looked down at her hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, I stepped back. Her expression cracked. You don't understand, she said, voice trembling. I leaned in close, low enough for only her to hear. No, Olivia. You don't understand. I paused, then said what I'd been holding since the moment I watched her walk out of that hotel room. You lost me the second you smiled walking away from him. And just like that, she stopped breathing. Not literally, But I could see the moment she felt it in her chest. The truth. The end. The fall. The silence that followed wasn't like the others. This one was final. There was no spin left to try. No script. No angle. She stood there, stunned, eyes glassy, lips parted. I watched as she tried to piece together something, anything, to hold on to. But she had nothing. All those years she spent crafting her image, manipulating rooms, playing queen of a castle built on my back, they didn't prepare her for this. And then, just like I knew she would, she cracked again. She turned, walked to the window, staring out at the city lights like they could offer a way out. She ran her hands through her hair, trying to stay composed. "Jake," she said softly. I didn't respond. She turned back to face me. Her voice dipped into something fragile. "I know you're hurt." I looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes," she said, stepping forward. "And I'm not trying to excuse what I did, but I never meant to hurt you." I took one step forward too, closing the distance. "When you walked out of that room smiling, who were you thinking about, Olivia?" She froze again. She wasn't ready for that question. Because the truth was, in that moment, I didn't exist to her. And now she didn't exist to me. Her face started to harden. That old instinct of hers. Attack before you're cornered. "You think you're some kind of saint," she snapped. "Let's not pretend our marriage was perfect. You worked all the time. You were distant. Cold. I felt invisible." There it was, the shift. The last card. "Blame me." I exhaled, slow. "You're reaching." Her mouth opened again, but I cut her off. "You don't even care," she said quietly. "Do you?" I looked at her for a long second. "Not anymore." And that broke something. For years, Olivia believed I'd always be there. That no matter what she did, I'd stay. That belief was her safety net. Now it was gone. Before she could say another word, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. Noah Callahan. I answered immediately. "Talk to me." "Got something big," he said. "Your wife's boyfriend?" "He's not exactly single." The words were like a final nail. I looked at Olivia. She was watching me now, panic creeping back into her eyes. "Send me everything," I said. "Already did," Noah replied. I hung up. She took a step forward. "Jake." "What was that?" I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked her dead in the eyes. "Your affair wasn't just a betrayal." Her face changed the second the words left my mouth. "It was a trap." She froze. She didn't get it, not yet, but she knew it was bad. Her fingers, still wrapped around her phone, trembled slightly. Her lips parted like she was going to ask a question, but for once, she stayed silent. So I gave her the rest. "The guy you've been sleeping with," I said calmly, "he's not single." She blinked. "What?" "Yeah. He's married. With a wife. 2 kids. Lives out in Westmont." She stared at me like I'd just spoken a different language. No, that's not. He didn't tell me that." "No," I nodded. "I'm sure he didn't." I walked across the room, grabbed my drink, and took a slow sip while her entire reality shifted behind me. I could practically hear it, her world starting to collapse, brick by brick. Everything she thought she had control over? Gone. "You were a side piece, Olivia," I said, turning back to her. "He fed you the same fantasy you tried feeding me. And now I've got texts, video, receipts, and a list of hotel visits long enough to make a Netflix doc." She opened her mouth to deny it, but nothing came out. Just a soft, pathetic breath. A sound I'd never heard from her before. Something close to defeat. I sat down again. Collected. "You see," I continued, "this isn't just about us anymore. It's about him. His wife. His job. And I've got it all lined up, ready to go public." Her hands flew up. "No, Jake, wait. Please." But I wasn't done. "You didn't just cheat. You became collateral in someone else's affair. And now, you're the weak link." She stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. "What are you going to do?" I looked up at her. And this time, I didn't hold back. I haven't decided yet. That hit her harder than anything I'd said so far. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, the first real time, she looked vulnerable. I'll tell his wife, she said quickly. I'll come clean. I'll fix it before you do. I laughed once, quiet and sharp. No, you won't. You don't know that, she fired back. I stood again. Close now. Inches from her face. I know you, Olivia. You don't fix. You bury. You manipulate. You survive. That's what you've always done. But now you're not in charge anymore. Her eyes welled with something that looked like panic. The mask was gone. The charm. The clever quips. The perfectly timed smiles. And standing in front of me was just a woman. A scared, cornered woman who finally realized the show was over. I took one last sip of my drink, set the glass down, and turned to leave the room. Jake, she said behind me. Her voice cracked on my name. I stopped at the doorway. Why are you doing this? I didn't turn around. Because for the first time in this entire marriage, I finally see you for who you really are. Then I walked out. I didn't go back home that night. Didn't call. Didn't text. I needed space, not to think, but to act. I booked a suite at a hotel downtown, ironically just a few blocks from where Olivia had held her little secret rendezvous. Fitting, really. As I sat on the balcony with a drink in hand, watching the city lights blur into each other, I opened the files Noah had sent me. There were more photos now. New ones. Restaurant meetings. Afternoon disappearances. One particular shot stood out. Olivia and her lover, arms touching in a dim corner of a wine bar. Her head tilted, laughing at something he whispered. She looked happy. Not fake, not staged. Happy. And I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. She hadn't just lied. She'd lived that lie better than she ever lived our marriage. It wasn't about the betrayal anymore. It was about the life she created behind my back. One she never hesitated to step into the second I wasn't looking. By morning, I had a plan. I called Noah. I want everything delivered to his wife. There was a pause on the line. Then, you sure? I'm done being subtle. All right, he said. It'll be in her inbox by noon. I leaned back in the chair, the hum of traffic rising from below. It was time. By 12:37 p.m., I got the call. Noah's voice was low, but there was satisfaction in it. She read the message. Twice. Clicked the video. And she called her husband 10 minutes ago. Screaming. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded to myself. Good. Let him feel it too. That evening, Olivia called me. 5 times. I didn't answer. She texted next. Olivia. Jake. Please. We need to talk. I didn't know he was married. I swear. I would never have. I messed up. I know that. But this, what you're doing, it's going to ruin me. Yes. That was the point. At 9 p.m., I walked through the front door of the house. She was waiting, standing in the middle of the living room like she'd been rehearsing a speech for hours. She looked different, less like a queen, more like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Save it. She shut her mouth. You think this is about revenge, I said. It's not. It's about balance. She blinked. Balance. For years, you controlled the narrative. You spun the truth, played the victim, wore the crown in a kingdom you didn't build. No. Now you get to feel what it's like to lose. I'm already losing, she whispered. Not yet, I said. But it's coming. I dropped a folder on the table beside her. Legal paperwork. Divorce filings. Asset breakdowns. A full list of everything she'd lose, and everything she never really owned. She flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. You're divorcing me? No, Olivia. I'm removing you. She looked up, eyes wide. I gave you everything, I said quietly. And you spit on it. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't soften. I'll go public if I have to, I warned. If you try to spin this, if you lie to anyone about what happened, I'll make sure every person in your social circle knows exactly who you are. I won't need to say a word. The footage will do all the talking." She shook her head, voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." And I meant it. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I wanted closure. Real closure. The kind that didn't come from forgiveness, but from walking away with your dignity while the other person watched theirs burn. She reached out once more, tears finally falling now. "I loved you." I took a step back. "No, Olivia. You loved what I gave you. And now it's gone." Then I turned, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door behind me. The echo of that door slamming shut was the first sound of a new beginning. And the last sound of everything she thought she could get away with. I didn't see her the next morning. When I came downstairs, the house was quiet again. Not the same suffocating quiet as before. This was different. Lighter. Like the place had finally taken a deep breath after holding it in for too long. Her bags were by the door. Not all of them. Just the ones that mattered. The rest. I imagined she'd come back for those later, once she figured out who she was without the life I built around her. There was a note. Neatly folded, sitting on the counter where I used to set her coffee every morning. I didn't read it. Didn't need to. There was nothing she could write in ink that would undo what she'd done in flesh. I tossed it in the trash. By noon, the lawyer confirmed she'd signed the initial documents. No fight. No protest. Just a signature that said she knew. She knew it was over. Word started to spread not long after. Whispers in her friend group. Subtle but sharp. Some of them knew something was off. Others had seen the footage. I made sure of that. I didn't send it directly, but people talk. Women who once envied her were now watching her fall with quiet relief. She disappeared from social media. First her posts, then her profiles. As if erasing the life she flaunted would somehow erase the truth underneath. But the internet doesn't forget. Neither do people. And neither do I. A few weeks passed. I moved out of the house, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to stay in the echo of what we were pretending to be. I bought a loft. Small, modern, clean. A fresh start. No ghosts in the walls. Claire, my assistant, noticed the change. I didn't say much, but she knew. People who really pay attention always do. "You're different lately," she said one afternoon. "I feel different," I replied. And I meant it. The man I was before. The one who gave and gave, thinking loyalty was enough. He died the day Olivia smiled at me with someone else's sweat still on her skin. I don't hate her. Not anymore. I see her now for what she is. A woman who thought she could have everything, and still be admired. Still be adored. Still be untouched. But the world doesn't work that way. Eventually, the mask falls. Eventually, the truth shows up on a screen you can't delete. A few months later, I got a call from Noah. He wasn't following her anymore. His work was done. But he liked to tie up loose ends. "She's living with her sister," he said. "Jobless. Broke. The guy she was seeing. His wife took the kids and the house. He's filing too." I didn't say anything. Just stared out the window at the city below. "You want me to keep tabs?" Noah asked. I thought about it. Then shook my head. "No need. She's not my problem anymore." He chuckled. "Fair enough." That night, I opened a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving. Not for celebration. For closure. I sat on the balcony, same as that first night, and let the cold wind cut through my shirt as the city kept moving below me. People rushing. Living. Falling. Rising. And I realized something. Revenge wasn't about hurting her. It was about reclaiming myself. Every second she spent believing she had power over me was another second I spent giving it away. But not anymore. I don't look back. I don't wonder how she's doing. I don't check her socials. I don't ask mutual friends. She made her choice. And I made mine. The last thing I ever said to her, before I walked out of that house for the final time, was simple. "I didn't lose you, Olivia. You lost me. And now Now I live like a man who remembers that. Every single day.